Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. We had a devil of a time getting yesterday's podcast up owing to the worldwide calamity involving Amazon Web Services, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit because it was a little foretaste of the kinds of trouble that are having all of our materials centralized in some fashion, though supposedly balkanized in the cloud, how easily that can all shut airports down, food delivery services. That was my big discovery yesterday evening, was going on to Seamless to order some food, and it basically having three restaurants that were able to access the Seamless system to order food. Anyway, we finally got it up last night around 11 p.m. And this one will. So there's a weird 12-hour window between the last podcast and this podcast, and isn't that exciting for all of you? But we are excited because we, of course, have with us executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John. We
Senior
hope
editor
there's only a
Seth Mandel.
12-hour window.
I know. We hope. We'll see. Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us after a jaunt to India and back again with an article on our website called Trump's Passage to India, our own Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John. The India trip was perhaps cover for some other trips I made. Can't disclose, but you may have heard some of the results in the news the past couple weeks. Some good news happened while I was away, and I'm not one to toot my own horn or anything.
Yeah,
but perhaps these were related. My voyage abroad and the wonderful victory of bringing the hostages home and implementing the ceasefire.
I knew it was you. I knew it had to be you.
Well, again, I don't want to take any credit or anything. I'm just saying.
Well, in fact, Matt didn't come back until every last living hostage was home.
I may have to leave again
today. Because everybody in America is in the Middle East, right? Just so you know, we not only have Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in Israel, but J.D. Vance is going. My friend Shmulik is on an El Al flight right now, getting off. My sister, of course. Like, there's millions of Americans in Israel trying to ensure that the ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire, is holding steady. Somehow the term ceasefire has come to be used as the sobriquet for what happened here with this deal, which involved no ceasing fire. I have to say, there are terms in which Hamas is not supposed to be firing on the Israelis, and the Israelis aren't supposed to be firing on Hamas, which sounds like a ceasefire. But in fact, the deal was, return the hostages. Israel's going to pull back, 42%. People shouldn't fire guns, and then we'll move on to the next phases. That's not a ceasefire as I understand it. And in fact, Israel, of course, after repeated violations of the ceasefire, went in hot and heavy yesterday morning, Monday morning, Sunday night, basically to, as Khan would say in The Wrath of Khan, explain it to them that they were not supposed to be doing what it is that they are doing. And but now Vance is so interested in Vance is there because, of course, one does not think of J.D. Vance as being either a very particularly Pacific person, number one, or a person who seems perfectly aligned with the administration's attitudes here on Israel, as expressed by the president in his appearance at the Knesset. Though he's a very malleable person, he's also very young. He's a young Republican, according to, as we now know, what it takes to be considered a young Republican in the group chats of young Republicans. Apparently, you just have to be, just as long as you're not quite collecting social. So I'm a young Republican. I'm about 6 months away from being able to collect Social Security. I guess I would constitute a young Republican. So we have to leave them alone the young Republicans, because they're just kids. They're 40-year-old racist, Hitler praising, scummy kids, and therefore they should be left alone because they're being 40.
I like how during the Obama era, it was Republicans were very very outraged that you could stay on your parents' insurance now till you were 26. 26 is not a kid,
Yeah.
but if you are a young Republican, you can go another decade, I think.
Just to talk about Vance's trip for a second, there is, I think, some type of personal interest in getting involved on Vance's part. The hostage release, of course, was kind of orchestrated by Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who were on 60 Minutes on Sunday in a much ballyhooed interview. It was presided over and the strategy laid out by President Trump, who went to address the Knesset. And throughout all these discussions, Vance was absent. And so here is, I think, Vance's opportunity to remind the world that he is a member of this administration. He has ambitions. Of course, he just celebrated the Marine's birthday with pomp and circumstance over the weekend. Now he's flying to Israel and meeting with Netanyahu and talking about the administration policy. So I think it's something of a profile raiser on Vance's part, because remember, Vance is kind of, you want to call him a rival. They're friends and collaborators, but let's call him the counterpart. Marco Rubio was there in the Knesset when Trump spoke, and Trump said that Marco Rubio would go down as the best Secretary of State ever, which would be a nice thing on your calling card if you wanted to run for president, say, in 2028 or beyond. So I can see some internal administration politics here. My bigger issue with the way that this is being covered is why are the administration officials speaking to Israel? It's not Israel that is in non-compliance with the terms of this agreement. It's Hamas. It's Hamas that hasn't released the bodies of the dead hostages, as was outlined in the agreement. It's Hamas that hasn't disarmed. It's Hamas that's killing all of the dissidents or people who allied with the anti-Hamas militias. Hamas is the issue here, and I think that both the administration, other than Trump, who was very good on this yesterday when he said that, look, if Hamas doesn't agree, we're going to have to go in and destroy them. But there's voices within the administration who, again, want to focus on Israel. And then, of course, there's the global media, where it's the headline today before we recorded this podcast was in the New York Times, fears that Netanyahu might break the ceasefire agreement.
Yeah. Well, this is always the way. This is one way in which this is continuous with prior multi-party negotiations in the Middle East, which is to say, if America says we're coming to town, Israel's like, great, come stay at the Camp David. They have a great breakfast. We'll all get together and have a meeting. And then there's a meeting, and some administration official says, why don't you give up half your country so that we can make a big announcement and win a Nobel Prize? And Israel's like, nah, we can't really do that, but we love you. And then there are leaks about how irresponsible and impossible Israel is, because Israel is, in fact, though this is not its reputation, always willing to negotiate as long as the United States wants it to negotiate. It takes the partnership or the alliance with the United States with such seriousness that, anyone can show up and will be treated with the kind of gravitas that is necessary. And there's no one to negotiate with on the other side. You're saying, who are they talking to? Well, apparently Witkoff and Jared met with some Hamas people just before the deal was struck to assure them of something or other. So it was the first actual face-to-face meeting that we know of between American officials and representatives of a Middle Eastern terror group in many, many, many years. So I guess they have some kind of an interlocutor they could go to. But you always go to Israel. You always go to Israel and say, you give up something first. And Israel is then put in the position of having to say, no, we've done that like 3 times. And once it worked out okay, maybe Camp David kind of worked out okay. But, when we gave up, we basically took the risk for peace with Oslo. That didn't work out so well for us. So, stop making this ask that we have to make the confidence building measures to kick off a peace deal. So the deal is already struck here, but the fact that they are going to Israel because, like the hotels are better and you don't have to walk through rubble, and who knows if the guy that you're meeting with didn't just flay the feet of some, poor Palestinian protester and shoot his mother and cut off the head of his son because they're trying to reestablish the total control of the strip, and maybe don't really want to be associated with that guy. So I don't know who they're negotiating with to get Hamas to play along. The only negotiating tactic is what Trump used, which is, I got these Israelis here and they have a lot of bullets and they have a lot of planes and they have total air superiority, and they now know where all the tunnels are, and they don't have any living people left, and they can just go hog wild on you if you don't make sense. That the only teeth that the agreement has is the activation of Israel's military power, because as we also read, the multilateral force that is going to come in to basically interpose itself between Israel and Hamas, or is going to monitor the peace between Israel and Hamas, is like many announcements of software innovations coming out of Silicon Valley, more a product of a desire for that to be a real thing than a real thing. Nobody seems ready.
I updated my iPhone and the ceasefire doesn't work anymore.
So it strikes me there are essentially like 2 narratives coming out of this.
Yeah.
One is coming straight from Trump's mouth virtually every day, saying Hamas has to put down its guns. If they don't put down its guns, we, whatever that has meant, will go in there and kill them, or if they don't disarm, they will be disarmed, and so on. And then there is this sort of anonymous media take that the administration is increasingly worried that Israel is going to break the, quote, ceasefire. They're contradictory narratives. I simply don't believe the second one. I don't believe that whatever is happening regarding the administration and officials in Israel has anything is anything along the lines of, look, you guys don't do anything, don't fire, you got to calm down. Don't. I think that is a sort of media concoction.
And also people in the administration, who want again to focus on Israel for various political or personal reasons. And I think what you're speaking about, Abe, is really important. It's maddening to try to analyze Trump foreign policy, because all of the explanations or rationales are refracted through the prism of the media, usually by anonymous leaks to certain reporters. Like in Israel's case, it's to Barak Ravid, who has an agenda all his own at Axios. But I saw something similar happening after Trump's meeting with Zelensky on Friday, where you got these anonymous leaks about how awful the meeting was between Zelensky and Trump, about how there was yelling, about how Trump was pushing maps off the table. It was a real low bar. And yet I heard from other people who were with Zelensky that day, and he was fine and chipper. And the actual policy response coming out of the meeting doesn't seem to be that anything has really changed, except Trump has decided not to, at this point, supply Ukraine with the Tomahawk missiles that Ukraine has requested. And yet, for people who want to show, on the one hand, that Trump is anti-Ukraine, or that Trump is pro-Putin, right? So the anti-Ukraine folks are typically the MAGA hardliners who hate Ukraine. So they want to show that Trump is mean to Ukraine. And then the people who want to show that Trump is pro-Putin are the liberals and the No Kings crowd. They're all casting this through different leaks and shadings and portrayals as some kind of huge juncture in the Ukraine-U.S. relationship. My bottom line is now I've just decided not to read anything anymore.
Right. Well, I said yesterday on the now probably vanished podcast that the line that Israel's strikes in response to the refusal to turn over the bodies of the remaining hostages and efforts to ambush Israeli soldiers in Gaza were met with a pretty harsh response, and that then Israel backed off. And the line that was being proffered by the same people you're talking about was the administration had to call those hot-headed Sabras and tell them to stand down because they're so crazy and they needed to stand down. And I don't believe that's the story. I think the story is there was a violation. They attacked Israeli soldiers. They went in and killed some people, and they responded to the failure of Hamas to keep up its end of the deal with force. And then they stopped because they did the response to the violations that they had to do. They don't want to engage in full-on kinetic activity in Gaza. The entire nation of Israel is thrilled to be out of what they believe to be that phase, or not the entire nation. There are people who really do ideologically and strategically think that Israel should have taken over Gaza for its own, long-term strategic interests. But they lost that argument. They lost that. They're very much a minority in the government and in Israeli public opinion. So we can presume that Israel's actions on Sunday night, Monday morning were measured. They were, okay, you did this, we're doing this, now we'll see how you respond once we have shown you what we're willing to do. If we don't do that, if we don't strike back when you violate these kinds of terms, then you're just gonna start, playing games every single day. And if you do that, we'll be right there to respond. And that actually is, again, that's the teeth of the deal.
Right. I mean, this is what I almost don't understand the discussion, because it's called an enforcement mechanism.
Yeah.
Every treaty, every ceasefire, every deal has an enforcement mechanism, or it's not going to be followed. And it's like, well, if Hamas, breaks the deal, what would isolate that moment for a second. Let's say Hamas fires RPGs at Israelis inside the Strip. Okay, what is the correct response here from somebody who doesn't want the war to be renewed? There's no answer to that. What is it? Wag your finger at Hamas. We just went through Hamas just dragged out the war for 2 years that it was never winning, on the ground, pieces wise. Wagging your finger at them is not going to make them back down. So everything has to have an enforcement mechanism, and it has to have teeth. And this is what happened. So they violated the ceasefire, so they got punished. It's almost like this, the great moment in The Office where they're waiting online at the annual meeting to talk, and the guy gets out of his spot online to go get something, and Dwight steps up into that guy's spot, and the guy comes back and he goes, "Oh, I was standing there. That was my spot. I just had to go get something." And Dwight turns to him and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Were you raised in a home without consequences?" It's like, yeah, this is what happens when you violate a ceasefire and you kill people.
So the enforcement mechanism, or some form of permanent enforcement mechanism, is supposed to be this multi-national force to go into to Gaza.
Right, it's just not there yet.
Yeah.
There has to be something before that's in place.
There, and it may never be there, is the point, because it's one thing to say, I will contribute 3,000 men to the multinational, and then it doesn't happen. Like somehow the 3,000 men don't show up. You got the credit when you needed it for saying you were going to do it, and then it doesn't happen. I mean, it reminds me there's a family, a little noticed family in the Godfather, not in the novel The Godfather, not really mentioned in the movie, the Bociccios, and they exist, the Bociccios, to be taken hostage. So if there are two families, right, and they need to settle their disputes without going to full on war, the Bociccios, they make their living being taken hostage. Each Bociccio is taken hostage by Tatalia, and then by Barzini, and then if something happens to the Bociccio hostage on one side or the other, the Bociccios just go and murder everybody. That's how it works. Like you're not allowed to kill the Bociccio, so therefore you can't go to war. But if the Bociccio dies, they are basically let loose to slaughter everybody. So that is what this multinational force. One of the reasons that a country would be maybe a little meshuggah to join the multinational force. It's like, oh, you really want to be standing there if Hamas decides it needs to reassert its authority by killing some folks? Maybe they won't be Israelis. Maybe they'll be nice, member of the, in your nice uniform from India, Matt's recent place, like you have your nice, you're a hussar and you have epaulets and you look really good in your fancy uniform, and then they'll just mow you down. And then that multinational, then Trump will basically be the enforcer of the Bociccio doctrine.
I mean, I think the enforcer is going to be a national force called the IDF.
Right, but
I think that's at the end of the day.
In the end, it's always the IDF. That's what I'm saying. But that is the only, it's sort of like what this force, the UN has always had these forces, right?
Right.
When there's a civil war conflict, it's like, send in the UN and its peacekeepers, and they're there to stand there and not get shot. Because if they get shot, woe betide. And then, of course, in those situations, in places where there are UN peacekeepers, I don't think they don't seem to get shot, usually because they're probably buying people off or getting bought off themselves, and they don't do any enforcing, by the way.
Or they join the bad guys, like
UNIFIL. Exactly.
in
That's what I mean. They're getting bought off, or they join or then they're not doing any enforcing. They're just staying there, and someone says, "I'm just going to go and kidnap 500 kids from from the other tribe and make them our slaves. You don't mind, do you? No, please go right ahead. We're not really allowed to use our guns anyway. So this is the world in which we have now entered the post-war phase, which is playing games in which we say that the world is somehow going to police and make sure that this ceasefire holds. But any rational person knows the only people who have a really vested interest in making sure the ceasefire holds, or whatever holds, or the lack of hostilities hold, are Israel and the United States.
And that's why this yellow line that Israel is constructing in the Strip is so important. Because even as you have this shuttle diplomacy and the high-level visit with J.D. Vance and Witkoff and Kushner in the region and talking to Leslie Stahl, on the ground, again, it's Israel demonstrating consequences when Hamas isn't returning the bodies, is killing 2 IDF soldiers, and it's Israel constructing this yellow line, which when you look at the photos, it's pretty obvious, past which Hamas cannot cross. And that will be kind of the status quo ahead.
And what's important
And they
about
need to sort of put the line in the sand, right, because of these reports, right? Because anytime Hamas can launch a deadly RPG attack and kill 2 Israelis, and the New York Times will say Israel renews attacks on Gaza, accusing Hamas of breaking the ceasefire. So Israel's like,
Well,
here's in Sharpie,
the
okay,
best
this
example
line.
of this is the stories that came out over the weekend as Hamas has reasserted control over its kind of enclave in the Strip, where the Western reporters are like, it's amazing that Hamas is really focusing its efforts on these hospitals and schools. Why is Hamas really going back into these hospitals and killing all of it? What we've been trying to tell you for 2 years is that they're not really hospitals.
And it's some quality infrastructure for them.
Yeah,
they know those places inside and out.
These people, that they're not really hospitals.
Yeah. It is interesting about the line in the sand, because Israel, however you slice it, Israel is in so much stronger a position emotionally than it was 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, because what's now happening is what is supposed to happen in a conventional situation, which is that Israel's army, as it is constituted, is now doing army things in Gaza, and you don't have to mobilize the country's civilians who themselves are military veterans who are in the reserves, the Miluim. And the last 2 years have seen the army augmented, double its size by the regular presence of reservists who are, have lives. They've moved on with their lives. They have jobs, they have families, they have this, and they went to serve their country just as they always have. And so in Israel's terms, it's not the same thing if this current iteration of the conflict flares up. That's like peacetime in Israel. That's the Israeli army at its proper size, with the people who are currently serving their mandatory service, doing what they need to do. And Israel's simply not gonna put them at risk, meaning if there are Hamas actions that seem to be kind of like staged terrorist assaults on individual platoons or whatever, Israel has and will exercise its its utter dominance of the skies, and what appears to be a very significant understanding of every square inch of Gaza that it gained over the last 2 years, and with an intelligence, and who knows what stuff they left behind to keep an eye on things on the ground and stuff like that, to protect their people. And so they're in a better mood, they're in a better place, and they also and then the West and the Western media have this deranged idea that what they really all want to do is just keep fighting and committing the non-genocide genocide and continue to starve the people who never starved. And of course, we got that thing last week where the 26,000 kids graduated from high school. Where would they go? I thought the entire Strip was leveled. Apparently people were going to high school and they got a nice diploma and stuff
nice
like
laptops.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, it's kind of, so that in and of itself puts Israel at an inestimable emotional advantage compared to where it was a couple weeks ago. It is just in better shape and better able to handle this change in the dynamic, means that it doesn't feel to them like some pause in Vietnam, which went on for 11 years. It feels like the war as it was constituted was won, and that this is the kind of thing that you're going to need to do, and that Israel has had to do with irredentist Palestinian forces in Gaza, on the West Bank, and in Lebanon for 60 years. After the beepers, after they took out the Hamas, the Hezbollah leadership in Beirut, did the beepers, all of that stuff, they have still been fighting to keep Hezbollah quiet and in its, like hidey holes since that astounding victory over Hezbollah. I mean, they know Hezbollah is not dead, like they're not all dead. And when they pop their heads up, they go in and they strafe something, and then it's like, okay, I guess we're going to go back in, and that's what Gaza's probably going to be like. But to Israel, it's not going to feel like they're involved in a major engagement. And so that's a change in the dynamic. And yeah, J.D. Vance going there, if he wants a piece of this, as Matt, you were suggesting, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan. If he now believes that this is a success and he wants to be one of its fathers, clearly you go with the winning side. And so maybe his politics are gonna evolve. Remember, we got those poll numbers yesterday. 80% of Republicans side with Israel over Hamas now. That number was trending horribly in the other direction. And I don't know, there's 93% support among Republicans for Trump's conduct in the Middle East. Well, if I'm Vance or I'm that wing of the Republican Party, I may be revisiting the priors that I have been trying to play with, or trying to reset the ideological map against Israel and not so implicitly the Jews, because it's not working and Trump wants to claim this, and ordinary Republicans seem to be very interested in giving him credit for having secured a victory.
Yeah, I mean, just
Right.
on the surface, if you want to be the successor to what the overwhelming majority of Republicans consider to be the best Republican president ever, I mean, I think he's about to displace Reagan in the estimates of Republican voters. And partly that's a consequence of Reagan, fading in history as well as Trump's success. But if you want to replace Trump, succeed him, well, wouldn't you take a page from his Knesset address, where he not only said, "I love you, Israel, you're a miracle, I'll always be with you," but also subtly kind of suggested that the anti-Semitic fringe that we see on the internet has no place in Trump's Republican Party. He's defined that in that speech. He defined that out of the party. I mean, so I think it'd be in Vance's interest to say, yeah, if I want to succeed Donald Trump, I'm going to follow him.
You make an important. Our friend Eli Lake has a remarkable piece in the Free Press he published last night about Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes, who is now essentially defining the outer limits, the most extreme limits of what might be considered the right, openly racist, openly anti-Semitic. And part of his play, as he gets millions of listeners and people watching the podcast that he's on and all this, is that he attacks Trump. He attacks Vance. He attacks Rubio. He's like, they're all wimps because they're not going where I'm going. Well, that's an interesting play, because that means if there is some idea in somebody's head, Vance's head or Vance's people's head, that he can bring those people in to be part of the kind of base coalition that's going to help him get elected or get the nomination in 2028. They're now defining themselves away from Trump. So if the party remains positively directed toward Trump and this goes on for a while, that Trump is not going to take it lying down. He's not going to like these podcasters trashing him and his signal achievements.
I
He's
mean,
not going to like being called a
Kooky
wuss.
Tucker Carlson,
Yeah,
right?
he's
Kooky
not gonna-
Tucker.
Kooky Tucker, and he's not going to like being called a wuss by some 28-year-old punk, with a microphone. And he'll do to them what he did to John Thune and Bob Corker and the regular Republicans who opposed him in his first term. Like he'll basically at some point say it's them or me. You can't have both. And what's more, Pam Bondi over there may be looking at we have the IRS look at Nick Fuentes' tax records, because if he's going to use power in that way, he's also got to frighten his friends as well as his enemies.
If he'll sue every national major network, over an interview with Kamala, maybe why wouldn't he sue somebody like Fuentes?
I think into
oblivion.
The worst mistake a politician can make is thinking that the infosphere resembles the electorate. The Democrats made this mistake continually, thinking that Morning Mika and MSNBC and the Nicole Wallace marathon somehow resembles the American electorate. And Republicans can make a similar mistake if they think that these podcasters are representative of where politics actually is. And just to take an example, in the news right now, you mentioned John Thune. Trump, of course, is an ally of John Thune, and John Thune is
not John Thune. I'm sorry, I meant Jeff
John
Flake.
McCain,
I
maybe.
apologize.
Yeah.
I got 3 hours of sleep last night.
Sure.
I meant Jeff Flake and Bob.
Jeff
Corker,
Flake, right? Anyway,
former senators he drove out of the Senate.
Yeah, I know.
One
I
from
just wanted to make sure that.
Thank you for correcting it.
Leader Thune doesn't get angry at us
Yeah.
and send us a snippy email.
Yeah,
we love Leader Thune, and anyway, he told the administration yesterday that the administration has to withdraw this nominee for the office of special counsel, Paul Ingrassia, because of these texts that Politico unveiled, where he said, Ingrassia said that he's got a little, what is he, a little Hitler in him or a little Nazi in him,
He got a little Nazi in him.
And then he also said that Martin Luther King was the George Floyd of the 1960s,
and went off. And look, so these are Republican. It's not just Thune. It's Rick Scott, pretty conservative guy. It's other Republican senators saying there's no support for this nomination.
Yeah. By the way, the other thing is Ed Cox, the chairman of the New York State Republican Party, who has spent 8 years trying to figure out how to make peace with and work with the radical Republican Trumpy wing of the party. A difficulty for him. He is actually Richard Nixon's son-in-law. Ed Cox, actually a really lovely guy, kicked out the young Republicans in the group chat from the New York State Republican Party and said, basically, you have no idea what it's been like to have these people in our tent. Like, they're impossible. So now the world, now basically it's like they gave me the rope to hang them with. And like a certain amount of political hygiene constantly requires you to clean up the messes that your people are making in order
to look outside the cave for a second and think, how is it actually working in the real world, where Donald Trump is an extremely successful president who happens to be the most pro-Israel president we've seen since Truman.
Regarding the possibility of Trump sort of going to war on the anti-Israel faction on the right, don't forget that's also the same faction that wants to keep dragging his administration down into the Epstein world.
And
that's
true. That's right.
He's had enough of them on that score already. He said they're losers. This is a Democrat plot hoax. And so on. So he really doesn't have any need for them.
But there too, in conversations with Republican officials after the summer break, they said, look, people wanted to talk about Iran. People want to talk about inflation. No one brought up Jeffrey Epstein. No one's going to vote on Jeffrey Epstein and what the Justice Department has or has not said. I mean, there might be libs who put that at the forefront of the, gazillion reasons why they hate Trump and are going to vote for him, but no Republican is going to make the decision like that. So it's having to always check
right
your what you're reading and listening to against what is actually happening.
Well,
in the real world.
You're talking about scale, and this is the thing that social media obliterates if you're not careful, which is scale. By which I mean 150 million people voted in the presidential election. Right? 155 million people voted in 2020. Epstein is driving traffic to Vanity Fair's website, to Tara Palmieri's podcast, and stuff like that. And because social media levels everything, if you're sort of in that world of following media through Twitter or whatever, you might think that everybody is obsessed with Jeffrey Epstein. But in fact, 2 million people are obsessed with Jeffrey Epstein, and 328 million people in America aren't obsessed with Jeffrey Epstein. But it is very hard to keep that scale in mind. And we all have it. Everybody has it. And having scale in mind has been a crisis for liberals and Democrats since the 1960s because of their domination of the mainstream media. When there was no social media, they could just emphasize certain types of stories, de-emphasize others, and therefore not see the rise of Ronald Reagan, not understand that Reagan was going to beat Jimmy Carter in a gigantic landslide. All these things that were continually surprising to them because they had no way to measure scale, and they thought that, the cover of Time magazine was the most important thing in the world, and that was actually what was most important thing in the world was inflation and interest rates, and not what Narishkeit they were peddling. I wanted to bring this up because there was this fantastic quote in the New York Times about Barry Weiss's takeover of CBS the other day. Wanted to read to you guys, just to give you a sense. Not only, it's not what she's up against, because I don't think she's up against much, because I think her people, the people who hired her and the Ellisons and everything like that, have her back and want her to do her worst. But so Michael Greenbaum and Benjamin Mullen wrote the following. Barry Weiss, the new editor-in-chief of CBS News, surprised senior staff at the venerable news program 60 Minutes during a meeting on Tuesday last week when she asked a provocative question. Why does the country think you're biased? The inquiry was met with stunned awkwardness, according to the three people who recounted details. The staff of 60 Minutes, the nation's most watched news program, view their coverage as firmly nonpartisan and reject criticism from President Trump and his allies who argue that it has a liberal slant. Well, I will grant you that I am, on Israel and everything, like an ally of President Trump. I do not think that the Trump administration would view me as a reliable ally. But I, in 1982, started work on a book about the liberal slant of 60 Minutes that I did not finish when I got out of college 43 years ago, about the liberal slant of 60 Minutes.
You didn't finish it because you're like Casaubon, and it's the book of all mythologies. You could never finish
it. Could never be finished
60 Minutes
because
bias.
The amount of liberal bias,
yes,
and it's infinitely variegated qualities over the course of 60 years of 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
They're sitting there in stunned awkwardness that somebody says to them, why do people think you're biased? First of all, is that disingenuous? I couldn't figure out whether the stunned awkwardness and their firm rejection of the idea that they are, that they're not nonpartisan. Are they crazy? Do they actually think this?
I think so.
Okay, if they do, then Barry just is now completely, that is like let her loose. they can't even recognize the need for reform in their ranks. Like, they don't even know that they have a problem and that they're only the most watched news program in America because they follow football. That's why they're the most watched news program, is that they follow football on Sunday, and nobody else established a better, has established a beachhead against them, after Dak Prescott, throws 5 touchdown passes, and then you move right into 60 Minutes. Okay, so like the world of the media that have been reporting on Gaza and this and that, it remains this astoundingly impermeable bubble. I don't think it would be so hard for 60 Minutes to say, we're a liberal program. We're a liberal program. We're the highest rated news program, on broadcast television, and we're liberals. So suck it. Like, you could do that too. It's like, seems to be working, come at me and say we're biased. Well, maybe that bias has an audience. So do a program on Thursday night called 90 Minutes and make it a conservative show.
Well, and remember 60 Minutes 2, which I think was on Wednesday night, and had amazingly, without that NFL lead-in,
right?
But they wasn't long for this world.
And say, there's another problem here for in how they see the world, which is that the world of media criticism or ombudsmania is firmly in the camp of don't talk to conservatives who even flirt with supporting Trump on any one issue. And this is fascism, and the media cannot be unbiased, right? If you say I'm CBS and maybe I should have somebody who can speak to the MAGA worldview on a panel sometime, Margaret Sullivan will stand outside your house banging on an old tin garbage can like the ones that on Sesame Street. This is you'll have Jeff Jarvis and all these others, these journalism professors and these and all the ombudsmen are all there to gatekeep against balance, against the idea of balance, against the idea of objectivity. I mean, this has been a recurring topic on this podcast. We've talked about this a lot. The war on objectivity, the belief that you can't be fair, you can't be, this and that. But it's the people who guard the supposed ethics of journalism themselves who have made themselves the enforcers against journalistic ethics. They're the ones that come at you. And so if you are a liberal news person and you are producing a show, the Margaret Sullivans of the world carry weight to you because they are supposedly the one sitting in judgment of the very idea of where journalism should be geared to and how even-handed it should be and all that other stuff. They're the critics. It's like putting out a TV show and saying, well, I'm going to ignore the Times TV critic or something. Well, you can, but it's going to have reach in your world what he says, and they want to hear it. They want to hear from Margaret Sullivan and the rest that you shouldn't talk to fascists, that everybody who disagrees with you is a fascist and you shouldn't talk to them. That gives them a great excuse to believe.
So what happens when the fascists are your boss? So you got two choices. They think free press is, too friendly to Trump and it's fascist, and it was good that Barry Weiss was run out of the New York Times. So now she's your boss. So you got two choices. You walk out on principle, kind of like Barry Weiss walked out of the New York Times on principle, or you stay there and try to run some bizarre rearguard terrorist action to maintain your place, or you make a real argument for yourself to Barry Weiss, which is, we've been here 60 years. We know what we're doing. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. You want to screw around with ideology? Go screw around with ideology elsewhere at CBS, where the morning show doesn't work and the evening news doesn't work and you don't have a streaming service and It's a shadow. The Tiffany network is a shadow of its former self. Leave us alone. Give Matt Continetti a show, and Eli Lake can be Andy Rooney, and you do that somewhere else and leave us alone. But they didn't do that. They did not do that because they want to continue to hide behind the mantle that they are fair and nonpartisan and objective. And no sane person believes that. And that's why I don't know that they believe it, because they believe it. But then I know somebody who was a producer at 60 Minutes for many years. I think she's retired. And, she said there wasn't, she was a sort of a samizdat conservative at 60 Minutes. And she was like, there isn't a single person here who has ever voted for a Republican ever.
John,
and there are 200 people on staff.
I think there are sane people who believe that 60 Minutes is non-biased, and I wouldn't have said that had I not. It's anecdotal. Met a lot of them over the past few years, but it's a generational cohort. These are older TV viewers who still believe in this nice, reassuring idea that eminent journalistic institutions are just, by definition, fair. They would. There is a standard that something so great and monolithic would never fall short of, and it's just a given. But I mean, the reality is that they're dying out.
But I have no problem. This is why I'm bringing this up. I have no problem with 60 Minutes being biased. Right. I don't believe in objectivity.
Right.
We are not an unbiased institution here. Now, granted, we don't have a broadcast license, and we're not supposed to be we're not here serving in the public interest according to the Federal Communications Act of 1934, like the CBS owned and operated stations, which form the bedrock of the CBS network, and therefore do have to kind of pretend toward objectivity, maybe, because they would therefore be against the legal writ that granted them these broadcast licenses. But I don't believe in it. And I think the case to be made for 60 Minutes is it's a successful liberal program. So if Barry Weiss comes in and says, why do people think you're biased? They could say, it doesn't matter whether they think we're biased or not. We have an audience of 7 million people a week. You go find that somewhere else. Like, we know what we're doing, and we're speaking to an audience that comes back to us every week. So you want to call it biased? You call it biased. You want to say that we're that, whatever. Okay, but we're fine. They didn't do that at the meeting. They got all harumphy or awkward or whatever, and didn't and were dishonest about who they are, and that is an act of bad faith, which again is fine. I think it's fine that there's a liberal program called 60 Minutes. The question is why there isn't a conservative program called 70 Minutes. I mean, or 62 Minutes or 59 Minutes. I mean, that's always been the question. The reason is because you might want to play in that sandbox, given the nature of the ideological divide in the United States. It doesn't exist because people at CBS don't want to produce that program. They never wanted to produce any such program because, as Seth would say, they think that we shouldn't be hearing from people like that because they're bad and they want to do bad things to the country, and they are doing good things to the country by making up stuff about ALAR and how red dye number 2 is going to kill you, and stuff from way back in the past.
We'll know Barry Weiss is having an impact when we see the pro asbestos segment on 60 Minutes. When that happens, we'll know.
Yes,
finally, we've turned the wheel.
Asbestos has prevented more deaths from fire than new studies show. Right. Yes, I know exactly.
DDT.
Yeah,
a reconsideration. I'm Leslie Stahl. That will be victory for us.
I just think I'm constant having worked for many years in close proximity to people at news magazines and at MSNBC and other places, who are in this mindset. And I like, they're human beings. So I like some of them and I dislike some of them and all of that. And they were always found it very refreshing how honest I was about what I believed, because they couldn't believe that anybody believed any such thing that I believed, and was still someone you could have a conversation with in the green room. That's the other part of this. That's the impermeable bubble part. But I just think, we're living in a world in which it's not like it doesn't have an effect. I mean, obviously the way the war in Gaza was covered had a bad effect on American public opinion relating to Israel. There was that the poll that Harry Ann analyzed that said that the shift in opinion toward the Palestinian sympathy for the Palestinians was 50 points over the course of 2 years after October 7th. That's real, and it was guided by the way in which the war was covered, although you could probably say a lot of that wasn't really mainstream coverage per se. It was Chinese algorithmic TikTok using its, evil magic to poison the minds of the impressionable young, played a large role there. But so it's not nothing, and I don't mean to make light of the importance of media bias. It's a very serious practical matter, but you got to admit, like, this is one fun, we're in one fun stage. Like, this is going to be a fun year, seeing what happens to the people at CBS.
And the Zionism thing played, what you could argue is an outsized role in the whining about Barry there, which is that the Gaza had become a litmus test on the left. It had become, your ticket to ride. You had to check Zionism at the door. It doesn't matter what Greta Thunberg says, if you care about climate and the sun swallowing the earth in a great ball of fire, you have to at least be wearing a keffiyeh, right? So that's the other part of this, is the litmus test aspect of it, which is like the thing they hate most about her is this thing that has become so big on the left, and the leftist activists have been able to implant it as a kind of gatekeeping, not just an issue that's important, but it's sort of, it's replaced abortion and some of these other issues, at least for the time being, as the test to whether you belong. And, some Barry having that position at CBS threatens that. And, I once explained this when Barry was at the Times and faced the criticism from the left that she faced. The reason that it mattered so much that she was at the Times at her position is that because people said, oh, it's ridiculous to say that they're just going after Barry because she's a conservative or she's non-liberal or something like that. Look, they have, Ross Douthat, and they have, conservative columnists and stuff like that happen. And I explained that Barry wasn't a columnist. Barry was an editor, somebody who works within the machinery inside, works with the gears, and helps shape coverage. And what people who hated Barry and people on the left really were scared of is the inclusion of a non-progressive worldview in how things get developed, in how stories might get edited, in how assignments might be made, all this other stuff. It wasn't that they feared that she would write an opinion piece. They didn't believe that people who believed what Barry believed belonged in the mainstream world, that it was dangerous to have somebody like that behind the scenes involved in it. And that's part of what the CBS thing is also.
Right. That's exactly right. By the way, I should read, before Matt gets to his recommendation, just out as we're recording is a truth from President Donald J. Trump. I'm just going to read it. Numerous of our now great allies, all capital letters, in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me that they would welcome the opportunity, at my request, to go into Gaza with a heavy force and, quote, straighten out, unquote, Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. The love and spirit for the Middle East has not been seen like this in 1,000 years. It is a beautiful thing to behold. I told those countries in Israel, not yet. There is still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they do not, an end to Hamas will be, all caps, fast, furious, and brutal. I would like to thank all those countries for that call to help. Also, I would like to thank the great and powerful country of Indonesia and its wonderful leader for all of the help they have shown and given to the Middle East and to the USA. To everyone, thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump. Why is the mention of Indonesia, aside from we're going to destroy Hamas if they don't stop? Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. It is also the world's most moderate Muslim country politically. And the leader of Indonesia has made very serious hints or overture, whatever, to the idea that he wants to normalize relations with Israel and be some part of some version of the Abraham Accords. And Trump is shining a spotlight on him to say, this is the kind of person that I want to be dealing with, the one who wants to be friendly with Israel, and everybody who is willing to go destroy Hamas is my kind of person. So once again, it's Christmas on every day here at the Commentary Podcast. Jonah Goldberg at our roast the other day said, he was speaking at our roast, and he said, for the first time, I feel like I've been invited to a MAGA event. I don't really feel like we fit in that category, but
well, it's a roast.
It was a roast. It was a funny line, and I'm quoting it. But I remain bewildered by the extent to which every word that comes out of Trump's mouth about Israel in this war is something that I, have dreamed of hearing an American president say openly for most of my adult lifetime. Anyway, Matt, you have a recommendation.
Thanks, John. I do have a recommendation. A lot of travel time lately. So this past weekend, I was able to watch the new documentary, Mr. Scorsese, on Apple TV+. It's a 5-hour-long a self-described portrait of Martin Scorsese, the filmmaker, by the director Rebecca Miller. If you have an Apple TV subscription, and if you are a fan of Martin Scorsese's work, I do recommend it. You learn a lot about him, his youth. You learn about his current circumstances. His wife suffers from Parkinson's, which was very affecting watching him with his wife. And you learn about the films, the great films: Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, The Departed. One thing I learned is that while I have watched all of Martin Scorsese's films and been affected by all of them, there's not really one that I like rewatching. And I'm a veteran or inveterate rewatcher of movies that I like. But it occurred to me that the Scorsese films are so expressive, so emotional, and so visceral that really once is enough. There's a famous scene in Raging Bull where Robert De Niro, as the boxer and kind of hoodlum Jake LaMotta, starts banging his head on a jail cell wall. And sometimes that's how you feel watching a Martin Scorsese picture. I think that the two exceptions I would make are Goodfellas, which I have watched many times, and which is a very rewatchable film, and then The Departed, which is, incidentally, the only film Scorsese ever won Best Director for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it came very late in his career, but it's also just an amazing movie. But anyway, if you're interested in Scorsese and film, Mr. Scorsese is worth a watch.
I watched the first part last night, and it's really, I commend it because it's really, half of it is not about him as a movie maker. Half of it is a portrait of being part of an Italian-American immigrant family in mid-century in and around New York, and very brilliantly made with a lot of footage of the sort of Little Italy in New York and suburban Long and Queens and various other places that I've actually never seen before. And it really gives you a flavor of these streets in a different way. Um, Rebecca Miller, who is a very interesting character on her own, who is the wife of Daniel Day-Lewis, which is how she got to know Scorsese because he was the star of Gangs of New York, a very unsuccessful Scorsese movie, is herself a writer and director and made a movie 10 years ago, excuse me, called, sorry, called Maggie's Plan with Greta Gerwig and Julianne Moore that is one of the best comedies of manners made in the last 25 years. It sort of came and went very invisibly. It's about an affair and an ex-wife and how Greta Gerwig wants to see if she can figure out some way to get her husband or her lover's wife paired off with somebody else so that she can finally be freed of this shadow hanging over her own relationship. And it's really a wonderful, funny, lively, extraordinarily well directed movie. And I will say the one Martin Scorsese movie that has always been underrated, and I guess this thing, I haven't seen it yet, makes a real case for, and I think is rewatchable and is a masterpiece and is one of the greatest literary adaptations in the history of cinema, is The Age of Innocence with Daniel Day-Lewis and Michelle Pfeiffer, based on the Edith Wharton novel, which was, for reasons that eluded me at the time and elude me now, condemned when it came out for having too much narration, the narration being taken directly from Edith Wharton's peerless description of New York City society in the 1870s, gorgeously read by Joanne Woodward, and then this portrait of a society in which people are too suppressed to express their real feelings in the most beautiful surroundings. It's a masterpiece, and it's always been undervalued.
They do spend some time on it. I should also mention that, as always, the unheralded star, along with Martin Scorsese, is Martin Scorsese's mother, Catherine Scorsese. Who appears throughout the film, in these, either in the movies in which she features or in some of the home documentaries. The one documentary, Italian American, is also quoted from extensive
Italian American, which I think you can watch Italian American on YouTube, and it is a great American documentary. It's about 25 minutes long, and it's the sort of just him interviewing his parents.
You learn that there was one film where Catherine Scorsese was cut from the film by her son, and you would ask, well, why? Why would that be? It was Taxi Driver, where apparently she was going to be Robert De Niro's, Travis Bickle's first passenger in the film, and they filmed it when she's had all these shopping bags. You see some images, some still images, but for whatever reason, Martin Scorsese decided, this movie I don't really want my mom in, and you know what? He was right.
He himself is great in Taxi Driver as a psychotic passenger.
I just want to say, I mean, actually, I think I've rewatched. Probably, I don't know. Maybe I might have rewatched Scorsese movies more than like anyone other movies. But that was probably where I was at in the 80s and 90s. But to my mind, Taxi Driver and King of Comedy have a uniquely sort of prophetic quality about our age and about youngish male nobodies and how they see the world.
Well, Paul Schrader, the screenwriter of both, makes the point in the film that the underground man, which was the focus of a lot of early Scorsese, is now on the internet and can find the other underground men in a way that he couldn't do in the 1970s and early 1980s, and that does make it a very kind of prophetic.
The oddity of Scorsese's career mirrors an oddity in the other great New York City filmmaker, now disgraced's career, Woody Allen's, which is to say that Woody Allen never made the most successful Woody Allen movie. The most successful Woody Allen movie is When Harry Met Sally, which took the kind of tropes of Woody Allen movies and found the heart and the kind of, took out the nihilism and gave it sort of like a universal quality of forgiveness and love and humor and stuff like that. And the most successful movie of 2019 is a literal ripoff merger of Raging Bull and King of Comedy. It's both movies shoved together with Robert De Niro in a subsidiary part, and that's Joker.
Taxi Driver and King of Comedy.
Taxi Driver. I'm sorry. Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. Joker is basically a remake of Taxi Driver, in which Travis Bickle of Taxi Driver turns into Rupert Pupkin of King of Comedy and is an incel and is also the Joker from DC movies. And that movie made $1.5 billion worldwide, and no Scorsese movie has made more than like 300 million. So he kind of like invented these tropes, but it took a more populist filmmaker to figure out how to mash them together to make like a box office sensation that would, that sort of, it's an interesting little a piece of data. And if you have not seen King of Comedy, which is a very unpleasant movie, I mean, it's not like a great hang. It is so brilliant.
It's worth watching
as a portrait of the rise of celebrity culture, the problem of feeling like you're invisible and unknown, and the lengths to which people will go to explode out of that if they can. There's never been a movie like it. It's the best movie about America, about the sort of American failure. The sort of portrait of an American failure and what happens when he just can't take it anymore, living his life as a failure, and the fantasies that he has of being a success. Anyway, that's Mr. Scorsese. I'm also recommending Maggie's Plan and The Age of Innocence and King of Comedy, I guess. But Mr. Scorsese is 5 hours long, so if you do that,
I watched it in a weekend.
There you go. Okay. We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt and Seth and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.